Assalamu alaikum everyone. I hope you all are fine. It's terrible, coronavirus, but keep praying, keep yourself healthy, and keep studying. So, from that perspective, here I have the second topic, and this is chapter 4 of the book. But this is the most important topic in microeconomics, the market forces of supply and demand. Like, if you study microeconomics, you gotta know how market supply and market demand works. All right, so this is a very important topic, and bear in mind, if you understand this topic, then you know more than half of microeconomics. So here we go. First, we will discuss what markets are. So a market is a group of buyers and sellers of a particular good. So the important thing to understand here is buyers and sellers. Here in Rahimia Khan, we have the market, right? And when we go to the market, we are the buyers, and the persons, the people who are selling the products, they are the sellers. So the market would not exist if the consumers or the buyers, that is us, we don't go to the market will not exist. And at the same time, if there are no sellers, then the buyers will not go to the market. So market consists of both buyers and sellers of a particular good or service. Therefore, it's very important to understand. It's very simple if you think of it like a simple market, but in terms of economics or microeconomics, a market consists of a number of buyers and sellers. Moving on. The terms supply and demand refer to the behavior of people as they interact with one another in markets. So here we have these terms, supply and demand. I will explain these in much more detail as we move along the slideshow. But here it's important to understand what behavior of people is. So in terms of microeconomics, or in terms of markets, the behavior of people is buying and selling. So when consumers or buyers go to the market, their behavior is going to the market and purchasing something. At the same time, the behavior of sellers, here we have sellers, is selling stuff, how they sell their stuff, how they sell their products. And when the buyers and sellers meet in the market, what happens? Interaction. They interact. All right, so buyers and sellers, they interact in the market, and this behavior refers to supply and demand. All right, moving on. In economics, especially microeconomics, is about how supply and demand interact in markets. So as I was saying, that demand and supply, these topics are very important to understand. So if you understand demand and supply, you understand more than half of microeconomics. So microeconomics is mainly related to demand and supply, how buyers and sellers interact in the market. So that's a very important topic. The topics that we will discuss even after this, like competitive markets and monopoly and other markets, that's also related to how buyers and sellers interact with each other. But that's a different case. Here, it's important to understand that market demand and market supply, these are the behavior of people, behavior of buyers and sellers, how they interact in the market. And it's very important for you to understand this. I will keep on reiterating this point, that demand and supply is the most important topic in microeconomics. And if you understand this topic, then you will understand the topics that we will study later on very clearly. All right. So now let's jump to the demand curve. Here on y-axis, we have price of ice cream cone. We are discussing the example of ice cream cone. So we will be drawing the demand curve of an ice cream cone. All right, so here we have the price. So it's $0.5, $1, $1.5. The price level is increases on the y-axis. So as we go up, the prices are increasing. That's how we make the demand curve out of this graph. And on the x-axis, we have the quantity of ice cream cones. So here we have 0, 1, 2, and this keeps on increasing as we move along. Just a second. Yeah. So this quantity keeps on increasing. And at the price of $3, the demand of ice cream is 0. Here, you can see that the demand for ice cream, the quantity of ice cream cones is 0. As the price decreases to $2.5, the quantity demanded increases to 2. And as the price decreases further, the quantity of ice creams demanded increases to 4. And as the price decreases further to $1.5, the quantity of ice cream cones increases to 6. And as we keep on going, at the price of 0, the quantity demanded is 12. And when we join all of these points, we get the demand curve. Just a second, let me remove this first. Yeah, so here we have the demand curve. And this is the demand curve, of ice cream. As you can notice that, so this curve simply shows the willingness of people to purchase ice cream. All right, so I'm writing this with my hands on screen, so that's why it's a little messy. Anyway, so let's assume that it's person A, the demand curve of person A. So for that person, if the price of ice cream is $0.5, he would like to purchase 10 ice creams. And if the price of ice cream increases to $1, his willingness to purchase ice creams would decrease to 8. And similarly, if the price increases to 0.5 to $2.5, as the price of ice cream keeps on increasing, his willingness to purchase ice cream keeps on decreasing. So this is called a demand curve. So you might be wondering why the demand curve slopes downward. It is due to the law of demand. So here we have this important law that you really need to understand, the law of demand. So the law of demand states that there is an inverse relationship between price and quantity. So as the price increases, quantity decreases. And as price decreases, quantity increases. So this is called an inverse relationship. So the demand curve slopes downward because of this relationship. Because as the price of a product increases, its quantity demanded decreases, and as the price of a product decreases, the quantity demanded increases. It is very pervasive in the economy. Most of the goods, whenever their price increases, their quantity demanded certainly decreases. It is so pervasive that the economists call this law a law of demand. It is very common to find in the market. So you can find a lot of products which follow this law. I mean, more than 95% of the products, maybe even more, follow this law of demand. So that's the reason why the demand curve slopes downward. Now let's talk about market demand. Market demand refers to sum of all individual demands for a particular good or service. Graphically, individual demand curves are summed horizontally to obtain the market demand curve. So this simply says that when you add all individual demand curves of a good, you get the market demand curve. We are going to see an example next to understand it better. So here is the example, and here we have the demand curve of Catherine. This is, again, we are talking about ice cream cones, and here we have the demand curve of Nicholas. So on the y-axis of Catherine's demand curve, we have the price, and on x-axis, we have the quantity of ice creams. And similar goes for Nicholas' demand curve. And now, as you can see that at the price 3, the quantity demanded is 0. And at the price 12, at the price 0, the quantity demanded is 12. And in the case of Nicholas, when the price is 2, the quantity demanded is 3. So how do you add up? When you add the demand curve of Catherine and Nicholas, you get the market demand curve. So look at the demand of Catherine at price level 2. The quantity demanded is 4. And at 2, Nicholas' quantity demanded is 3. So what do? At price 2, here we have price 2, you add 3, the 4 quantity demanded of Catherine and 3 quantity demanded of Nicholas. So at price 2, we have 3 plus 4, 3 plus 4 of quantity demanded. That is 7, right? So look at the market demand curve. At price 2, you have the quantity 7 right here. And let's do one more example. So at price, let's talk about price 1. Yeah, at price 1, I did click on the pen. All right. At price 1, the quantity demanded is, let's track it down, 8. All right. So we have the quantity demanded 8. And for Nicholas at price 1, the quantity demanded is, the line is going way off, is 5. So at price 5, the quantity demanded, total quantity demanded is 8 plus 5 is equal to 13. So at price 1 here, we should get 13. I mean, if we are able to make a straight line. Yeah, it is certainly, oh sorry, this is wrong. Let me remove that. Not this line. The line goes here. I'm sorry. Come on. Yep. The line goes here. 13. Yep. That's right. So that's how we get the market demand curve. You add the demand curve of each individual, in this case, Catherine and Nicholas, and there might be thousands of individuals in the market. When you add the individual demand curve of all these people, you get the market demand curve. Next, we have two simple rules for movements versus shifts. So we have a demand curve here, right here, all right? So this is the demand curve. It can be of demand curve of anything. But let's continue with ice creams. Ice creams. Here we have the price of ice cream. Here we have the quantity of ice cream. So when the demand curves goes from here to here, we say that the demand curve has shifted. We call it a shift in the demand curve, as this word here says. All right. At the same, on the other hand, we will be talking about the movement now. On the other hand, this is the quantity of ice cream, this is the price of ice cream. When there is a movement along the demand curve, we move from maybe this point to this point. So there is a movement along the demand curve. So rule 1 says that when an independent variable changes and that variable does not appear on the graph, the curve on the graph will shift. So whenever the variable, the independent variable that is not on the graph, it changes, it will result in the shift of the graph. So uh, I'm going to discuss it further, but you can come back and revisit this again. So we will talk about determinants of demand later on, and determinants of demand are like price, sorry, not price, weather, income, and other determinants. So these determinants, you don't see them on the graph, right? We have price here and quantity. There is no income or weather on the graph. So when these variables, these are called independent variables. When these independent variables are not present on the graph, and the graph, so this will lead to a shift in the graph. So when the income of a person changes, it will lead to a shift in the demand curve. And the rule 2 says that when an independent variable does appear on the graph, the curve on the graph will not shift. Instead, a movement along the existing curve will occur. So here, in this case, the independent variable which appears on the graph is the price level here. This price level, this is an independent variable, and it appears on the graph. So whenever an independent variable appears on the graph, the curve on the graph will not shift. It will make a movement along the curve from point A to point B. So I hope it's clear that there are the movements along the curve, and then there are the shifts of the curve from D1 to maybe demand 1 to demand 2, a shift like this one. But when we are talking about the shifts, we are talking about independent variables like wealth, income, weather, these variables which are not present on the graph. But when we are talking about the movement along the curve, we are talking about the price level, when price level changes. All right, so we will discuss these further as well. But I hope it's clear, but you need to revisit this slide when I discuss the determinants of demand. You need to come back on this one again. Continuing with the same concepts, we are going to talk about the change in quantity demanded versus change in demand. So change in quantity demanded means movement along the demand curve, which means caused by a change in the price of the product. So when there is a movement along the demand curve, which means that we move from point A to point B of the demand curve, from point A to point B. This means that we are moving along the demand curve, movement along the demand curve, and it is caused by the price of the product. Price is the independent variable in this case, and it is present on the graph as well. So when we are talking about the movement along the demand curve, we are saying change in quantity demanded, that the quantity demanded has changed. So whenever you hear the sentence that the quantity demanded has changed for ice cream, it means that there is a movement along the demand curve. And next, we have we continue with the same one, the changes in the quantity demanded. We have at point A, we have on the y-axis we have price of cigarettes per pack. On x-axis we have number of cigarettes smoked per day. At price of 2, the quantity demanded is 20. So now there is a policy, a tax that raises the price of cigarettes results in a movement along the demand curve. So when there is a tax, the price increases from $2 to $4, and the quantity and the number of cigarettes smoked per day decreases from 20 to 12. So there is a movement along the curve from A to C. This is called changes in quantity demanded. And why did that happen? Because of a tax. All right. So now we are going to talk about change in demand. A shift in the demand curve either to the left or to the right. It is caused by a change in a determinant other than the price level. So as we discussed earlier, that whenever the independent variable is not present on the graph, then it will lead to a shift in the demand curve. And when we are talking about the shift on the demand in the demand curve, here if we have D here, D2 here, this means a shift in the demand curve. The demand curve can shift to the right or to the left as well. So the demand curve will shift to the right or to the left whenever the independent variable or the determinants of the demand curve of the demand are not present on the graph. We only have price present on the graph, and other variables are not present. So whenever we are talking about uh, other variables, other determinants of demand other than price level, then it will lead to a shift in the demand curve. Now we will discuss the determinants of demand. So determinants are basically the factors which impact demand. So here we will take the example of ice creams. So what are the factors that increase or decrease the demand for ice creams in, let's say, Raimyar Khan? It's a hot city, so just think of the factors which impact the demand for ice cream in this city. Let's see what some of the factors are. So the first, we have market price. So this simply means that if the price of ice cream increases is high, then the demand of ice cream would be low. So for example, if the price of ice cream is 200 rupees, then the demand would be low. But if the market price of ice cream is 20, then the demand would be higher. Then more people would like to eat ice cream. All right. And apart from market price, let's see, the second one is consumer income. So let's say if your income is 1 lakh, so your demand for ice cream would be higher. But if your income is let's say 10,000, then your demand for ice cream would be lower because you will spend most of your income on purchasing the necessities and you would not have enough income to spend on your luxuries, right? So if your income is 1 lakh, you will have money left after you have purchased your necessities. You will have money left to purchase ice cream. But if your income is only 10,000, that is, you don't have enough income, so your demand for ice cream would be lower as well. After that, we have prices of related goods. So what are some of the related goods, related goods to ice cream? So instead of ice cream, we can purchase the related good. So we have, instead of ice cream, if you're feeling hot, then you can eat either an ice cream that we have here, or let's say Coca-Cola or Pepsi. Apart from this, what other options do we have? I think apart from ice cream, we have frozen yogurt. Frozen yogurt, yeah, that's another option that you can eat instead of an ice cream, or yeah, the healthy option, milk. You can drink milk instead of almond milk or other milk instead of going for the ice cream, right? So these are some of the substitutes. So if the price of these substitutes is lower, then you would prefer these substitutes instead of eating an ice cream. But we also have complements. We will discuss substitutes and complements in further slides. Anyway, so we have these three determinants of ice cream. After that, we have tastes. So if more people like ice creams, then then the demand of that ice cream will increase. So if the taste of ice cream is good, if the people like that ice cream, then the demand for ice cream will increase. If people don't like this ice cream, then the demand for ice cream will decrease. So here in Raimya Khan, for example, we have many places where we can purchase ice creams, but there are some ice cream makers who make really good ice cream. So their demand for ice cream would be higher, and the shops who do not make good ice creams, their ice cream demand would be lower. All right, so taste is the fourth factor, and after that we have expectations. If people expect the prices of ice cream, the price of ice cream to increase in future, then or any other product, let's say, then their demand for that product would increase. But if people expect the price of a product will decrease in the future, then their demand for that product will decrease now and increase in the future. So people sometimes have expectations related to products. So and their demand increases or decreases depending on their expectations for that product. So in current scenario, so the expectations of people were that the hand sanitizers, their demand would increase. They would significantly in few days. So they started purchasing hand sanitizers. They ran to the market and started purchasing it. So that was the expectation. And yeah, these are some of the determinants of demand that we discussed. And can you think of some examples? What are some other examples apart from ice creams? One of the example that I can think of is let's discuss a car. So if the market price of a car increases, the demand of car would decrease, right? So this is what happened in Pakistan as well. The market price of many cars increased recently, and the demand for those cars has decreased. And at the same time, if consumer income decreases, the demand for car decreases again. And if the prices of related goods, so let's say motorbikes, if the price of motorbikes decreases, the demand for cars would decrease again. And similarly, tastes can also be related to the car. If people prefer cars now, then their demand would increase. And at the same time, expectations also play a part in the example of cars. If people expect the cars prices to increase further in future, then they might increase the demand in the present. So this is another example that we have discussed here. I'm sorry, there's a lot of clutter, but it's necessary to make you understand these examples. All right, so let's discuss these factors a little more in detail. So here we have the consumer income, the second factor that we discussed, and the second determinant. So we will be discussing about two types of goods. The first good is normal good. I'm sorry, I didn't need to do that. I'm gonna go for the pen. All right, so first we are gonna discuss the normal goods. So normal goods are those goods which increase when consumers' income increases. So if income increases, their demand increases, and if income decreases, their demand decreases. These are normal goods. So here we have the graph of a normal good. On x-axis we have the quantity of ice creams, on y-axis we have the price of ice cream cone, right? And here we have the demand curve D1. So assume if your income increases, it will lead to an increase in the demand for ice creams, right? So the demand curve will shift from D1 to D2. So in this case, ice cream is a normal good. As your income increased, it led to an increase in demand for ice creams, which shows that ice cream is a normal good. So whenever the demand for a particular good increases due to your income, and it decreases when your income decreases, that's the case of a normal good. Next, we will discuss the case of an inferior good. Here we have an inferior good. So it's the same price of ice cream as here. On the y-axis, the quantity of ice cream cones is on the x-axis. And here we have D1 as demand. And yeah, so again, if your income increases, let's say from 1 lakh to 2 lakh, if the demand for ice cream decreases, then it's an inferior good. So if your income increases, and an increase of income leads to a decrease in demand for ice creams, then that means that ice cream is an inferior good and not a normal good. So it's important to understand the difference between inferior and normal goods. In the case of normal goods, an increase in income leads to an increase in demand, and a decrease in income leads to decrease in demand. But in the case of inferior goods, an increase in income leads to decrease in demand, and a decrease in income leads to increase in demand. So it's opposite. All right, I hope you understand it. Now we will discuss another important determinant of demand, that is prices of related goods. So here we have two types of related goods. The first one are substitutes and the second one are complements. So as you can read here, when a fall in the price of one good reduces the demand for another good, the two goods are substitutes. So here we are talking about substitutes. And the second one is, of course, about complements, which says when a fall in the price of one good increases the demand for another good, the two goods are called complements. Alright, so we will continue the example of ice cream here. So, ice cream. And the substitute of ice cream would be, let's say, milk. So for example, if the price of milk decreases significantly, then the demand for ice cream would decrease because these are substitutes. So if the price of milk decreases, people will drink more milk instead of drinking ice cream, eating ice cream. So these two goods are substitutes. But at the same time, if the price of milk increases, then people would eat more ice cream and drink less milk. So the demand for ice cream would increase. All right, so that's an example of substitutes, how prices of related goods act. And now we will discuss the complements. Let me erase this first. All right. So now we will discuss the case of complements. In the case of complements, the two complements that you can understand easily are a car and petrol. So if the price of cars increase, then people will purchase less cars. And due to that, the demand for petrol would decrease, right? And at the same time, if the price of cars decrease, I'm talking about price here, price of cars, if the price of cars decrease, then people will purchase more cars and the demand for petrol will increase. So these are complements. Some other complements that I can think of right now are shoes and polish, or CD or CD-ROM. So you cannot use CD-ROMs without CDs. So if the price of CDs increase, the demand for CD-ROM will decrease. All right. So these are also complements. So two goods which can be used together are basically complements. And finally, in the case of demand, we will review the demand curve through this table. All right, so here we are going to discuss the change in quantity demanded. I'm sorry, I need to go to this. Yeah, change in quantity demanded versus change in demand. So on the left, we have variables that affect quantity demanded, and on the right side, we have a change in this variable. So for example, in the case of price, as we discussed before, it represents a movement along the demand curve. It will not shift the curve, but will lead to movement along the curve. And in the case of other variables, which we discussed before, like income, price of related goods, taste, expectations, and number of buyers, these will lead to a shift in the demand curve, a shift to the right or to the left. A shift to the right means an increase in demand, and a shift to the left means a decrease in demand. All right?